Now that we've learned some about consumer surplus and producer surplus, when we have those two concepts, when we have them measured, you can actually on a graph calculate the area of consumer surplus and the area of producer surplus, and you have this dollar value that represents what they call economic surplus. You're just adding the two together to come up with economic surplus. And so it's showing you the total value to the consumers and producers that they're not having to pay or to receive the market price. The difference between what they're willing to pay and what they have to pay, the difference between what they're willing to receive and what they actually get. And so that actually has a dollar value. And so one of the significant ways to use this is to say, okay, so this would be the market equilibrium, and if I add up consumer surplus and producer surplus, this is the total value to the market participants. What if there's a policy put in place that takes us away from market equilibrium? And that's what we're going to look at here. What is the impact on the surplus, the economic surplus, if we're not at market equilibrium? And then you can actually make a decision. If I'm trying to put a particular policy in place, this is how much is lost to the consumers and the producers. And is that something we want to do? You can do your own cost-benefit analysis and that sort of thing. So what we want to look at right now is the impact of such policies that might take us away from the actual market equilibrium. So the sort of policies we're going to be talking about are called price ceilings and price floors. And the reason governments might step in and institute this might be because they're trying to help a particular group. Let's start with price floor. And so in a price floor, you can have a situation where the government has decided that this product should not be sold for less than this price. Okay, so here's our price floor. And they're doing it because they're trying to protect the seller. They're trying to make sure the seller gets some minimum amount of money. Where we actually see this in the real world is the agriculture industry, where the government is trying to make sure the farmers have some minimum price that they will be able to sell their good at. There's a lot of time that passes from the time they plant to the time they sell. There's a lot of other issues, and so the original idea was farmers might go bankrupt, they might drop out, and then we won't have enough food when we really need to grow it. So that was one of the reasons they did the price floor, was to make sure that farmers were at least guaranteed a minimum price. So when they do that, there's a possibility we can get this picture we have here, where the actual resulting price floor, the minimum price that is legally allowed to sell at, is higher than the actual market equilibrium. So we could end up with that as our price, and since it's a higher price, we would end up with a lower quantity being bought and sold. So the question we're looking at here then today is, what is the impact on consumer surplus and producer surplus? So first of all, let's look at what consumer surplus and producer surplus should be in if there were no price floor. So let me just label these little different areas here so we can talk about them. If there was no price floor, we would be at market equilibrium, where these two cross. We'd be at P star and Q star. And so as we learn, consumer surplus is area below the demand curve and above the price. And producer surplus is area below the market price and above the supply curve. So using these letters that we have here, with no price floor, consumer surplus equals A plus B plus C. And producer surplus would equal D plus E. Okay. Now, with the price floor, things are a little different because we're now at this price. So we still can use the same idea, the area below the demand curve and above the market price, not the equilibrium price, but the current set market price. And so now we see that consumer surplus has shrunk. You have consumer surplus now equal to A only, so that you've lost your B and C. And then here's one you got to watch carefully. The producer surplus is the area below the market price and above the supply curve, but only to the quantity that is actually being bought and sold. You don't go over to Q star. So at PF, the quantity that is actually being sold and bought is the QF. So you would go the area below the market price and above the supply curve. So only B and D, not C and E. So now producer surplus is B plus D. So if we look at what has been omitted from our consumer surplus and producer surplus compared back to equilibrium price, we see C was lost. It didn't go anywhere. B simply transferred consumers to producers. D stayed the same, and E was lost as well. So C plus E is lost. It's consumer surplus or producer surplus that went to no one. And we have a special name for that, dead weight loss, and its definition is surplus that went to no one. The fact that we see a transfer of B in the consumers to producers is not considered positive or negative. It's like a neutral thing. As long as somebody is getting the benefit when you're evaluating a policy to see if this is something we want to do, you don't really, as an economist, you don't really make an issue of that. At least somebody's getting the benefit. Where we're concerned is this deadweight loss. And so we could, if we had numbers here, we could add up the consumer surplus under market equilibrium, have a dollar amount. We could figure out what it would be under producer surplus. And then we can compare those numbers. We can add them together and get the total surplus to the market. And we compare that number to what happens if we put this price floor in place, because we're going to lose this dollar amount to the producers and consumers. It's just not gained by anyone. And then you can compare that to whatever benefit you think it is being that the price floor is providing, and decide if that's a good policy or not. Okay, so now that we've done price floor, I think we'll be able to understand price ceiling pretty quickly. The main difference is you've got your price ceiling below the market equilibrium. So here what you have is government concerned about the consumers paying too much. So they're going to set some maximum price and say the product cannot be sold for more than that. Whereas with the price floor, they were concerned about the sellers making sure they were paid enough. Okay, make sure they were paid no less than the price floor price. All right, so here we can see that we have a P star Q star for market equilibrium, but they've set the price at PC, okay? So let's look at what the consumer surplus is and the producer surplus is at market equilibrium when there's no price ceiling. So we would have the area above the market price, market equilibrium price, and below the demand curve. And so that would be our A plus B plus C. And without the price ceiling, we would have producer surplus be below the market equilibrium price and above the supply curve, and that is your D plus E plus F. With the price ceiling, we're now going to be operating with this as our market price. So consumer surplus is the area above the market price and below the demand curve, and again, just up to the quantity that will actually be bought and sold at that price. So we're just going to go straight up to the demand curve here. So the area below the demand curve and above the market price is now A, B, and D. So instead of A plus B plus C, we have A plus B plus D. So we've lost C and gained D. We can already know from having looked at price floors that C is not going to go to anyone. That'll be part of the deadweight loss. D used to be part of the producers, has now transferred to the consumers. So again, we don't concern ourselves with the transfer between the producers and consumers. And when we think about what this policy is for, the price ceiling was here to benefit the consumer. It makes sense that they gain some of the surplus from producers. And the price floor was there to gain for the producers, so it makes sense that they were gaining from the consumer. So that little transfer makes sense. And then continuing on with the price ceiling, what would be the producer's surplus? We would look at our market price, we look at our supply curve, and we see it's just this area F. So producer surplus has lost D, which we just said went to the consumers, and has lost F. So if we look at our before and after, we can see that the two parts that are missing are our C and E, and that will make up our deadweight loss. They are surplus under market equilibrium conditions that goes to no one under this price ceiling condition, and so there's your deadweight loss. One of the problems with a price ceiling is the incentive to cheat, to do something under the table, to what they call the black market. So a common example for price ceiling is rent control. And so under that circumstance, you can imagine that the government has decided that this rent is too high and they want to make some maximum amount of rent. By doing so, one of the consequences that's not intended is we get a drop in number of apartments being made available. It used to be a Q-star amount, now it's QC amount, so it's some less amount of apartments. Landlords might sell their buildings, they might be used for things other than residential living, or apartments can turn into condos, so they stop being available for rent and they become something you purchase. And so these various ways are how we see this drop in the quantity being supplied of apartments. So what happens then is they've set the price at this PC level. There's only QC available, but what is QC, that quantity, worth to consumers? So for that, you come up to the demand curve, and we find that consumers are willing to pay this price when there's only this many available. And so there's this incentive to find ways to make it somebody's business to rent to you and not someone else. So maybe there's a kickback involved, maybe there's some other bribe or payment made, because that's how much this price here is, how much this number of apartments is really worth. And so in that case, if the black market actually gets off the ground and it's not really something they can stop, you've actually made the situation worse. You didn't like people paying this amount, and now you've got them paying this amount. So that can be one of the problems with any sort of price ceiling. All right, one last comment, and then we'll wrap up price floors and price ceilings, is to help you remember which is which. Because when you hear floor, you naturally think bottom, so shouldn't the one down here be the floor and the one up here should be ceiling? Why is it labeled this way? Well, it makes sense when you understand market forces. When you have a price floor, you have yourself above the equilibrium price, which should be here. Anytime the market is out of equilibrium, in this case above the market equilibrium, you have, in this case, you'd have quantity being supplied here and quantity being demanded here. So you've got a huge surplus. And that would give the sellers an incentive to lower the price, to try and clear their surplus. And so you're going to see market forces pushing the price down along the supply curve. And as the price falls, the consumers are willing to buy more and more, so you're also moving down along the demand curve. So the market forces are pushing down this way, and they hit this floor. So that's why the floor is up there. Similarly, on the price ceiling, you've got the market forces pushing up towards the market equilibrium price, and they hit a ceiling.